So, if saving more money hasn't actually made you feel safer, it's not really a money problem, it's a meaning problem. Let me explain. If you're already financially successful, but you're still lying awake calculating how long your money would last if everything went wrong, this is for you. And maybe this sounds too familiar. You're working harder when you feel anxious about money, telling yourself that if you just earn a little bit more, save a little bit more, then you'll finally feel secure. But here's what's actually happening instead. You are achieving those financial goals. Perhaps you've hit those income targets, you've built up those savings pots. Maybe you've even had what others would call good money, and yet you still feel like you're one crisis away from losing everything. So you work harder. You maybe take on a job that you don't really want to. You stay in a job for too long. You hoard money potentially, afraid to take risks by investing money. And all this while, you're telling yourself that being sensible and being responsible is the right thing with money. But actually, deep down, you know that no amount of money feels like enough. And the cycle continues. Overworking leads to anxiety. Anxiety leads to hoarding, underinvesting, which keeps you feeling unsafe, which drives you back to overwork. And round we go, trapped in what I call the not enoughness loop. And actually, the worst part of this for you is that everyone around you thinks that you should feel secure. You know, you have got the business, you've got the income, you've got the savings account. And so from the outside, you look successful. And then you start wondering, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I feel grateful for what I have? Why doesn't more money make me feel any safer? And here's what I want you to know. First of all, you are definitely not alone. What you're actually experiencing isn't a flaw in your character. It's a nervous system response that has very often been pre-programmed before you had any say in the matter. And today we're going to be exploring why it is that your logical mind can look at your bank account and know that you're fine, but your nervous system, this emotional system that's running the show, is making you feel like you don't have enough. We're going to uncover some of the hidden meanings that your brain has attached to money. And I'm going to show you the very first steps to breaking free from this cycle. Because actually feeling financially safe isn't about having more money. It's about understanding how the rewiring part of your brain, how that rewiring that part of you that doesn't believe that you're allowed to feel financially secure. And first of all, let me tell you about a very specific moment when I realized for myself that my relationship with money had actually nothing to do with money at all. And it started with my youngest son, Thomas. And my own experience showed me where my not enough programming really came from. And so I want to take you back to the 1st of October 2013 when my second son, Thomas, had been born. And we almost lost him twice in that first 5 weeks of life. First at 3 days old from an infection, and they gave us a 50-50 chance that he would survive. And then again at 5 weeks old. And I'll never forget that morning. Thomas had been restless all night. He wasn't feeding properly. He was making these kind of grunting noises. And my friend was coming over to do these baby hand castings with my eldest son off at nursery. And Thomas was asleep in the Moses basket by the bay window. And fast forward just 1 hour, he was asleep in his Moses basket, which should have been my very first warning. He'd been asleep for quite some time that morning. And when I picked him up to do his hand casting, he screamed at me. His hands and his feet were freezing cold. And my mother's intuition kind of really kicked in to say that something's just not quite right. His temperature was almost 39 degrees. And with that, I just didn't take any chances, straight to A&E. And within moments, I had a consultant who looked at Thomas and we were wheeled into resuscitation. 15 doctors swarmed around us and they kept using this word, sepsis. And I didn't know what sepsis meant. I was frantically Googling it later that night as I sat beside his bed, watching him struggle to breathe and wondering if he'd actually make it through the night. And 2 days later, after having a lumbar puncture, he was diagnosed with bacterial meningitis. And the reason I share that story is because what's important for this conversation is that whilst everybody was telling me that, oh, you got him into hospital so quickly, you've saved his life, all I felt was guilt and shame. I was a second-time mum at that point. I should have known the symptoms. I should have recognized sepsis. This is what my brain was telling me. I should have been more prepared. And this may sound familiar for you, even when you've done everything right. And even in that scenario, when I'd done everything right, even when Thomas recovered fully, I focused so much on what I hadn't known, for what I hadn't prepared for what I should have done differently. And 12 months later, I was back at work in the bank. I was a qualified financial advisor at that time. And a woman came in to my office who had just lost her husband. She was grieving, completely overwhelmed by all of the financial jargon that she didn't understand. And I spent 2 hours with her, no sales, no products, just supporting her and helping her understand what she had, giving her the peace of mind that she would be okay. And my manager afterwards called me and said, "How many products did you sell her?" And I was like, "None." She didn't need any financial products. She just needed support. She needed space to have conversations and to learn about the financial jargon that was keeping her stuck, that was keeping her feeling shame, that she didn't understand it, that she'd never been taught about money. And that woman felt the same way I did about the medical jargon with Thomas, disempowered, unprepared, like she should know more than she did. The same shame, the same not enough feeling, but around money instead of medicine. And I realized then that my drive to hoard money, to over prepare financially, to never feel like I had enough, all came from that same place. This almost complete terror of being caught unprepared when someone I love is at risk. And here's what I really want you to understand is that these not enough feelings around money, they're not really about money either. They're about safety, they're about protection, they're about making sure that you never get caught unprepared when someone you love is at stake. And that may be protecting yourself. Maybe you have created this lifestyle for yourself and you're so fearful that it's going to be taken away. Maybe it's the fear of having that security taken away from the life that you've created for your loved ones or for your family. And your nervous system literally doesn't know how to distinguish between a medical emergency or a financial emergency. It just knows that, well, last time we weren't prepared enough, something bad happened. And so we cannot let that happen again. And the tricky part of this is that for me in that example, my hypervigilance around Thomas's health actually saved his life. And so hypervigilance around money often does the opposite of what we want it to do. And instead of creating safety, it creates more anxiety, more worries, more stresses. And so instead of building wealth, it keeps us small. It stops us from enjoying our money. Instead of preparing us for kind of emergencies, it stops us from really living our most enriched lives, living in the present moment. And this very much plays into the architect money story type, which if you haven't had an opportunity to take my quiz yet, it's a great way to really understand how your relationship with money goes on to play out through the way that you manage, save and invest money. And you can take that quiz at katherinemorgan.com/quiz. But today I wanted to show you how your money relationship works through what I call the 3-zone model. And I want you to think of it like 3 completely different rooms in your house. Each one is serving a very specific function in how you relate to money. And actually, when these 3 zones are working really well, then money flows naturally. We feel safe around money. Money feels very neutral. We don't have the kind of polarity of emotions at play. And when there's some disruption between these three zones because of the not enough programming, this unworthiness around money, then they actually create the exact opposite of what you're trying to achieve. And once you understand how these zones are being affected, you can start to sort of really reveal, heal, and see where these patterns are showing up for you with your relationship with money. And not by forcing yourself to think differently, but by helping your nervous system to feel safe enough to function the way that it's supposed to. Now, I've created a free resource called the 5 Hidden Money Beliefs and 3 Zone Self-Check that's going to really help you to identify exactly which of those money patterns, which may be inherited patterns, are running your financial life and where your zones need the most attention. And it's the same assessment framework that I actually use in my financial coach certification and with my private clients to create breakthrough moments. You can download it at themoneypanel.co.uk/beliefs. That's in the show notes below and on your screen if you're watching on video. Take the assessment while we're talking or right after this episode, because what we're going to be covering today is going to make so much more sense when you can see your own patterns very, very clearly. So let me ask you a question. When you think about money and you think about having enough money, where do you feel that in your body? Just take a moment right now to put your hand on your chest, to take a breath, and just notice. Is there a sensation, a tension somewhere, a tightness, a flutter of anxiety? What are you noticing? Because that physical response is your nervous system talking. And it's been talking to us for quite some time, but we may have just not noticed it. And this 3-zone model assessment is going to help you to understand what is your nervous system actually trying to tell you through your physical responses. And the 3 zones that we're going to be talking about are receiving, holding, and giving. And when you become stuck in this not enoughness, undeserving loop, each zone kind of gets hijacked. So let's start with the receiving zone, because this is where most of the work really, truly begins. And the receiving zone is your capacity to accept good things into your life. Money, yes, but also compliments, opportunities, help, gifts at Christmas time, recognition for your work, anything that could improve your situation. And when this zone is really healthy, you can receive these things with gratitude, acceptance, grace, because you know that you deserve them. And so you allow them fully into your life. But when you're stuck in this undeserving not enoughness loop, this receiving zone becomes the first line of defense. And your nervous system starts treating good things as threats. Why? Because if you don't have these things, you can't lose them. You know, if you don't receive the compliment, well, then you won't be devastated when people criticize you later. If you don't accept the full payment from your clients that you deserve, then you won't disappoint clients who might expect too much. You know, it really becomes a protection strategy, and your body, your nervous system thinks that it's keeping you safe by pushing away actually the very things that would create the safety in the first place, right? Because if we were to accept that compliment, as an example, we would be accepting love for ourselves. And that's the part that can feel unsafe, right? And, you know, if someone says, oh, you know, well done on achieving your award for your work, or well done on getting a bestseller status on your book, you know, you're so good at what you do. If your immediate response is, oh, I was just lucky, you know, or, oh, anyone could have done that, you know, oh, well, still got so far to go. You know, what's actually happening is that you're really communicating that, well, if I accept what they're saying to me, then people are going to expect this all the time. Well, what happens if I can't deliver next time? What happens if I don't do it again? And so we kind of play small and we play safe. I actually experienced this with my youngest son. He was like, because people tell him a lot, oh, you're so clever, this is easy for you. He's like, it puts so much pressure on me, mum, that I have to be, I have to get 100% on all of my exam results. I have to do good all the time, right? Because his mind has taken this belief that, oh, well, if people are going to expect this, I've got to be brilliant all the time. And it becomes, a stress. So that can be a big red flag for this kind of deserving zone. And another area can be where, maybe you're just about to send a quote out and you think, well, this is just too much. It's too much. Let me just knock a bit off, for it to feel okay, for it to feel safe. And maybe the client hasn't even seen it yet, but already you're negotiating yourself down. Pricing is such a big issue with money for a lot of people. And sometimes that can be shown as well, where you might decide to offer a discount. It's normally £2,000, but for you, 1,500, and you literally start pushing money away before anybody else does. And this is really about your nervous system trying to control rejection by rejecting yourself first. Just think about that for a moment. If you reject yourself first, it means somebody else can't reject you. It's very deeply wrapped up into worthiness. And it also shows up where you struggle with gifts or by accepting help. So maybe somebody offers to help you move house and you spend 20 minutes explaining why I don't really need help. I can do it by myself. Maybe a friend offers to buy you dinner to celebrate your success and you insist on splitting the bill. I've definitely done that before. Maybe your partner offers to handle something really stressful for you. Let me sort the holiday out. And you're like, no, I'll do it. I've got it. And really it's our brain, our bodies communicating that, well, if I don't need anything from anybody, then I can't be disappointed when they let me down. Maybe we've had earlier experiences of being let down. And it can also happen with like missing really exciting opportunities. I often see this for the architect money story type, is that a really big opportunity comes your way, a speaking gig, a collaboration, maybe an email comes into your inbox. You're like, oh my God, like this author wants to speak with me, And so this big opportunity comes your way and your first thought is, well, I'm not ready. It's not perfect enough. They've probably made a mistake. There must be somebody else better for this. Let me connect this person with someone else. And you literally start talking yourself out of receiving good things before you've even properly considered them. And here's the cost of having a undeserving receiving zone, is that when this zone gets compromised, we end up working twice as hard to earn half as much, because you're constantly pushing away any recognition, the payments, the opportunities that could really actually help you to thrive. And you almost reverse, but you kind of become this reverse money magnet attracting abundance. Rather than attracting it, you're actually repelling it. And then you wonder why nothing feels like enough, or why you're always struggling, and why success feels so hard to reach. And the very thing that's trying to protect you is not having enough, is exactly what you create by refusing to receive. So right now, I want you to imagine that somebody is offering you exactly what you most need in your life, in your business, in your career right now. Maybe it's that dream client that you've been waiting for. Maybe it's the ideal revenue goal that you've reached, or the recognition that you're craving. And as you receive this, I want you to just first of all acknowledge what's happening in your body. We want you to feel expansion and joy, not contraction and tension. That little voice that's saying you don't deserve it. And that's what we want to move you towards, is to if you did feel contraction, it's just understanding that there's that operating system with this protection pattern that's just outlived its usefulness, and it's now about helping your body to really expand. And this kind of moves us into this holding zone, the second zone, because in the holding zone, let's say, for example, you manage to receive some good things. Maybe your nervous system is protesting it a little bit, but you're, feeling deserving of receiving that compliment, receiving that money. And then maybe you land a really, really great opportunity. And maybe you've had a really good month in your business, or you just had a pay rise at work. And this is where the holding zone comes in. And this is where the kind of not enoughness loop really kind of takes hold. And what happens is the holding zone is your capacity to hold and keep and enjoy what you have accepted to receive. And it's about feeling safe with what you have and being able to hold on to that, knowing that having good things doesn't make you a bad person. Having good things doesn't mean that somebody's going to take it away, that it's just temporary, that you get to keep all of that. And when this holding zone is healthy, you can save money without feeling anxious. You can spend money without guilt. You can invest money with confidence, knowing that, well, I don't know exactly what my returns might be, but I still feel safe to make those decisions. And if you think about this cycle, if we get stuck in the not enoughness loop, then the holding zone almost becomes a bit of a financial prison. Instead of money being a tool that serves you, it becomes something that you serve. So you hoard it, you can't enjoy it. You save it, but you can't spend it. You have it, but you don't feel like it's actually enough. And so your nervous system thinks that if you hold on to it really tightly, and if you're just careful enough, and you never spend it on anything unnecessary, then maybe, just maybe, you'll finally feel safe. But we know that isn't the case, and the complete opposite happens. And so the tighter you grip, the more anxious you become with money. And so some of the red flags with this hoarding zone is that we hoard with guilt. That feeling when you've got money, you've got it saved in the bank, but instead of feeling really proud and secure, you actually feel guilty. And there's this little voice that's saying, well, other people have less than you, or you don't deserve this when other people are struggling in the world. What gives you the right to have more? So you keep this money, but you punish yourself for almost having it. You live like you're poor even when you're not. You deny yourself basic comforts because spending money feels selfish or wrong. And again, this is really about, it's not about nobility. This is about your nervous system trying to protect you from the judgment of other people. People might say, she's got too much, or how come she gets to have this? It's that judgment piece, this fear of judgment that really shows up. And the second way that this can show up is what I would call investment paralysis. I work with so many architects, very often actually on a one-to-one basis, because they come to me and they're like, I want you to build me a wealth map that shows me that my money's never going to run out, that I'm always going to have enough. And very often they have more in cash than any other of the archetypes. And that you should be investing your money, but every option just feels way too risky. So you research endlessly, you're looking for this perfect, completely safe investment that doesn't exist. And meanwhile, your money is sitting in low interest accounts. It's losing value to inflation, to tax potentially. Or maybe you do invest, but you're checking those investments obsessively, ready to pull everything out at the first sign of volatility. So afraid of losing money that you guarantee that you won't make any, right? And it's that your body's way of communicating, well, we can't afford to lose anything because we don't have enough to begin with. And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, but emotionally, that's what you're experiencing. And this can also show up not just with investment decisions, but also with spending decisions. So every single purchase that you make, even necessary ones, come with this kind of side of anxiety. And so you buy something that you really need, and maybe it's tires for your car or equipment for your business, and then immediately feel guilty for doing it. Maybe you've made decisions in the past where you've spent some considerable money and then it hasn't worked, and you've just held on to this guilt and shame that, oh, I knew that was a bad decision. And so you start questioning all your other financial decisions. And that really plays out in this kind of hoarding, holding zone, and it can also show up through the fact that when you do start to accumulate money, that the number that actually once felt safe keeps moving, so you might feel like, well, if I just have 5,000, 10,000 pounds saved, then I'll feel secure. And then you reach that 10,000 pounds and then suddenly the number doubles. It becomes 20,000, or actually now it's 50,000, or now it's 100,000. And the goalposts keep moving because that feeling of enough has nothing to do with the actual money. I've worked with so many clients who have literally had hundreds of thousands of pounds saved, and they still feel like they're one emergency away from disaster, because when your holding zone is damaged, where there's some worthiness there around holding, no amount of money is going to feel like enough. And so that when your holding zone is compromised in any way, again, we end up feeling like we're living in this financial prison, that we become a slave to money. So you can't enjoy it. And even though you've worked really hard and you've created that security, it just doesn't feel enough. And so this is a really, I would say, out of all of the zones, the receiving zone is where it often shows up, but the holding zone is where we can make the biggest changes. We can actually create a lot of patterns of safety and security, because the irony is that the very money that you have already saved to create freedom becomes a thing that actually feels restricted, right? So just take a moment to think about your savings accounts or your investment portfolios and just imagine those numbers. Think about those numbers, how much you have in those accounts. And again, just notice what's going on in your body. Do you feel a sense of pride and security? Or do you still feel that like there's some anxiety there or responsibility, maybe even guilt of having that? And if you felt anything other than peaceful and confident in this holding zone, then we know that there's some work to be done in that zone. And then that kind of moves us into the third zone, right? The giving zone. And this is where this unworthiness, this not enoughness loop gets really, really deep. And this zone, this giving zone, is even when you maybe can't enjoy what you have, even when you're living in this financial prison almost with yourself, there's still one more zone where this programming shows up. And this is often the hardest one to recognize, because the giving zone is where your generosity becomes something that actually is almost against you, right? So let me explain. So the giving zone is your capacity to share your resources, your money, your time, your energy, your skills, but from a place of genuine choice. And when this zone is healthy, you give because you want to, not because you have to. This plays into the enabler money story type. The enabler is somebody who is very giving in their relationship with money, but can also feel resentment when that giving becomes out of balance. And so when this zone is healthy, this is where you can say no without feeling guilty, and yes without feeling resentment. And how this often shows up is in your giving zone, where this sort of non-enoughness loop becomes the place where you try and earn your worthiness. And your nervous system is treating generosity as a survival strategy. If I give enough, if I help enough, if I sacrifice enough, then maybe I'll be valuable enough to keep around. And it turns your natural generosity into a compulsion where we don't give from overflow, you give from emptiness. You're helping other people before you're helping yourself. And you're hoping that that giving is actually going to fill your cup. But it rarely does. And so instead, it creates this cycle where the more you give, the more depleted you feel, the more you need to prove your worth by giving even more. And so you end up being the person that everybody calls when they need help. And you never say no, even when you're exhausted, even when you don't have the time or the money to spare, you always find a way to help. Maybe you have financially supported somebody else, and what I would call financially rescuing other people. It can actually be a very generous thing to do, but it can also be a very disempowering thing to do. You're disempowering the person receiving that help by almost sort of inadvertently saying to them, well, you can't do this yourself, but let me come in and help you, right? And I've actually worked a lot with clients, children of very affluent families who have been financially rescued, and it actually creates the pacifist money story type where they shoulder that responsibility because they don't feel safe to make their own decisions because somebody's been making those decisions for them. Now, I'm not saying that every financial gift that you make creates that for people, but when we're in the overgiving zone, that can be created. And so, very often saying no feels like you're letting somebody down, and your nervous system can't handle that risk of being seen as selfish or uncaring. So maybe you offer free sessions to your friends or people who can't afford to pay, even though you're struggling financially yourself. Maybe you lend money to friends when they never pay you back, or you can't really afford to give that money away. Maybe you volunteer for everything at your kids' school because saying no just doesn't feel kind. And this isn't about not being kind. It's not about being unkind by saying no. It's about understanding why that pattern is happening. And one of the other red flags for this zone is underinvesting in yourself because you're so generous to everybody else's needs that maybe spending £50 on yourself doesn't feel like something you need. And so you'll invest in your business after everybody else's needs are met, paying your team before you're paying yourself. And you justify this by telling yourself that, well, this is the responsible thing to do, or others need it more than I do. And really underneath all of that, it's that we don't feel deserving to invest in ourselves until we've proven our worth by helping everybody else first. And the result of that is that we become less and less capable of actually helping anyone because we're running on empty. This is where people get into burnout. And this can also finally show up with this sort of resentful generosity, when giving becomes the automatic behavior, but it actually stops you from feeling good. So you help people, but there's this part of you that actually feels quite angry about it. Maybe you give money, but you resent the person that's asking. You say yes, but inside you, you're like, oh, like this person always asks me. Why can't they just figure it out for themselves? And then you feel guilty about the resentment and the anger, which makes you give even more to prove that, well, I'm not really that selfish. And it can become a very exhausting cycle that actually doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help the person that you're trying to help. And so resentfulness giving isn't, it isn't about how generous are you. It really isn't about generosity. And as I mentioned earlier, when we rescue people financially, we disempower them, by paying for things that they could probably pay for themselves. We're trying to solve their money problems instead of helping them to actually learn how to solve their own. And so, we think we're being loving, but we're actually keeping them dependent. And every time we rescue someone else financially and neglecting our own financial health, we're kind of reinforcing that belief that your money doesn't belong to you, that it belongs to somebody who needs it more. It's interesting, isn't it? So when your giving zone is hijacked by this unworthiness programming, we end up giving away not just your money, but your power. You become financially, emotionally depleted while the people you're trying to help become increasingly dependent on your rescue. And so you will attract takers instead of reciprocal relationships. You'll model that financial stress instead of financial health. And you'll teach the people that you love the most that self-sacrifice is love and that their needs should always come last. Right? Your needs should come last. So I'm so passionate about helping you understand this, because the irony in all of this is that in trying to prove you're worthy of love by giving everything away, you're making it impossible for people to love you for who you are. They love what you do for them, but also for who you are, right? Whether you do or whether you say yes or whether you say no. So again, I want you to just to tap into your body here. And I want you to think about the last time that someone asked you for money, or the last time that someone asked you for help. And before you even decided what to say, what's happening in your body? Was there a moment of choice, a sense of freedom to say yes or to say no? Or did you immediately feel obliged? And if you felt any obligation rather than choice, your giving zone is likely compromised. And this generosity has become a survival mechanism instead of a gift from a place of choice. So those are the complete unworthiness loop. The receiving zone that's pushing away opportunities and recognition, the holding zone that's turning money into a source of anxiety rather than security, and the giving zone that is depleting your resources in this attempt to prove your worthiness. And the result is that you work harder and harder, but you can never receive enough. You can never hold enough. You can never give enough to feel truly safe, because the problem was never about the money. It was the meaning that you have attached to money that is the issue. And here's what I want you to know, having heard and talked about those three zones. None of those zones are permanent. If all of those zones are emotional responses, we get to change the emotional responses. We get to change the emotional responses by changing our belief system. And our belief system is simply just patterns that we have learned, which means that they can be unlearned. And that's what we're going to start doing right now. Are you ready? So you might be wondering, well, how do we change these patterns? How we change these patterns is to understand where they came from in the first place. And the answer very often lies in something that I call inherited money beliefs. It's this unconscious programming that you've absorbed about money very often before you've even had a way to communicate. And think about the messages that you may have heard growing up around money. Money doesn't grow on trees. We can't afford that. Rich people are greedy. And maybe it was through observing parents with money, or maybe it was just noticing your surroundings, your environment, societal conditioning. When I think about some of the magazines that I used to read as a teenager, I mean, it was all about frugal, saving the pennies. It was never about investing conversations. And so, what did that teach me as a young girl? Well, I need to be worrying about where I'm spending my pennies and not actually even entering into conversations about investing. I recently went to a cryptocurrency workshop in Jersey. There were 25 people in the room. I was the only woman, right? This is a societal conditioning that we have been accustomed to. And it does set up our belief systems. It's like our nervous system's instruction manual for how to relate to money. And when your brain is very young, it's in that learning mode. We're soaking everything up around us. It does create these survival patterns. And the problem with that is that what potentially kept your parents or grandparents safe in their circumstances might be completely wrong for your lifetime and for this evolvement of money that we are already starting to see in this generation. But our bodies, our nervous systems don't know that. They're still following this old programming. So the very first step to create change is with awareness, not judgment, not trying to change everything at once, just gentle curiosity and awareness of how these patterns are showing up in your life. And so rather than trying to dig into the past and into those past money lessons, which can actually bring up a lot of trauma, money traumas, shames, start in the present. And for the next 7 days, I want you to become a detective of your money patterns. So when you deflect a compliment, notice. When you feel anxious about spending money that you could actually afford to spend, notice. When you say yes to helping someone financially, even though you don't really want to, notice. Don't try and change anything yet. Just notice. Because you can't heal what you can't see. We have to reveal the emotional response before we can heal. And most of those patterns operate below our consciousness awareness. So use the 3-zone check download that I've provided for you to help you to spot those patterns. I've designed it to help you to really reveal some of those beliefs that are running most of the financial decisions that you are making. And one simple practice that you can start today is every morning, before you check your phone, before you go into your bank account app, put your hand onto your heart and ask yourself, what is already enough in my life right now? Don't think about it from the mind, from a logical place. Feel it. Let your body remember what gratitude and appreciation actually feels like, even if it's just for 30 seconds. It's not about positive thinking through the mind. It's about training our bodies to feel safe. It's the body that informs the brain, not the other way around. The body tells the brain, right? So teaching your body what feels enough so that you can recognize it easily. And that one single practice has helped so many, like hundreds of my clients, to shift out of this not enoughness loop. It's really simple. It's really, really easy. You don't have to go into a 1-hour meditation. It's just really noticing where in the body you feel that resistance and gently expanding that, right? Getting our bodies used to holding. And in next week's episode, I'm going to be talking about how we move from this kind of scarcity, this not enoughness, into enoughness. I'm going to share with you a complete practice for rewiring your relationship with money. And I'm going to break down this sort of 10-minute routine that really helped me to break through my own scarcity programming and some of the language patterns that keep you stuck and how to interrupt them. how to interrupt them, how to interpret them in real time. We're also going to dive deeper into how to work with your nervous system rather than against it. And I'm going to give you some practical tools to handling some of the resistance that comes up. Right. So I'll look forward to seeing you again on the It's Not About the Money podcast next week, or if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify, I will see you again next Monday. And before you go, make sure you download the 5 hidden money beliefs and 3-zone checklist at themoneypanel.co.uk/beliefs. This assessment is going to help you to really reveal those patterns that are driving your financial decisions. And it includes very specific guidance for working through each of those zones. So seriously, don't skip this part. Those insights that you're going to gain from the assessment are going to transform how you understand your relationship with money. And it's designed to work alongside everything that we are covering in this Money Beliefs series. So I'll see you next week. And until then, be gentle with yourself as you notice these patterns. And awareness is the very first gift that you can give yourself on this journey.